Hello, everyone, and welcome to Point of Purchase. This is episode 13. My name is Trisha Williams. I'm the managing partner and client success leader here at Geeks Commerce, which is an agency that helps our clients grow their sales online. I'm going to be hosting today. So if you're joining us live on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, please drop us a note in the comments field. Just say hello. Let us know where you're tuning in from, which city, which town. We'd love for you to join in the conversation. And of course, throughout today's session, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments field as well. So for those of you who are new to the show, let me give you a bit of a background. Point of Purchase, or POP, is a live web series presented by Geeks Commerce. And in each episode, we dive into topics surrounding the retail and e-commerce ecosystems. Everything from industry news to technology, best practices, business strategies, and so much more. We tap into our own experience as e-commerce services provider, and we bring in great guests to share their experiences in the e-com industry as well. So our topic today is keeping it fresh, how global CPG brands are winning the digital shelf. And if there's one thing we've learned over the last 18 months or so, it's the critical role that e-commerce plays across all industries, even those traditionally slower to adapt to digital, like grocery. I think we've all seen that, especially here in Canada. You know, COVID-19 related restrictions caused a massive surge in online grocery and CPG shopping, with services like click and collect, curbside pickup, buy online and pick up in store or BOPIS, and scheduled or on-demand delivery like Instacart or Uber Eats. All in all, critical personal care, pet care, grocery items have been in the spotlight for the past 18 months. And CPG brands are continuing to strategize in order to keep the momentum going. For many brands, this strategizing includes a sharper focus on e-commerce or the digital shelf. And we've definitely seen the shift even here at GeekSpeak. Our clients have traditionally had to plead for budget internally in order to invest in the e-commerce channel. But that's certainly shifted because that growth in the e-commerce channel has been absolutely undeniable over the pandemic. And it's accelerated growth in so many different ways. So most of the brands now are actually having no problem getting those investment dollars from their leadership teams because, brands are really seeing the e-commerce channel as a priority and one that's actually really urgent. So joining us today to discuss how CPG brands are winning the digital shelf is Sarah Kingham, founder and director of My Digital Shelf. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Trisha. Thanks for having me.
You bet. It's great to have you, and I really appreciate you joining us all the way from London. I know it's the end of the day there for you.
It's a pleasure.
Awesome. So I'll give you a little bit of a background here. Sarah founded My Digital Shelf 7 years ago to create a platform for CPG brands and grocery retailers to come together to discuss collaborative ideas on how to optimize their e-commerce strategies. Sarah organizes and hosts the MDS events and webinars, which are currently available in the UK, the US, Netherlands, and Canada. And she's currently expanding the platform into more global markets within the online grocery industry. And, quite honestly, Sarah, your online and digital grocery summit has become a marquee event on the calendar for CPG brands and retailers. So glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much for that introduction.
Yeah, you bet. And of course, we are super excited to be sponsoring the summit once again this year. So Sarah, to kick things off, I'd like for you to tell our viewers a little bit more about yourself. Talk to us about your background and what really led you to founding My Digital Shelf.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to share some more details with you about My Digital Shelf. So we are quite a small sort of boutique company based in London. And I just saw this gap in the market, about 7 years ago for a platform really more for the brands as opposed to the retailers. So there's a lot of insights, a lot of events out there for the retailers when it comes to e-commerce, but there wasn't as much out there for the brands. And particularly within grocery, within CPG or FMCG, as we call it over here, for brands to really take more ownership of their strategies, and look at that internal structuring, but also the external partnerships that they had with the retailers. So we did our first event here in the UK, and then we decided to very quickly expand into the US market, which was, catching up very quickly with the UK. So yeah, that's really how it started. We just saw that opportunity to put an event on that was geared more towards the brands, and even till now we're sort of looking for more markets and seeing more markets where there's that same gap, really. Even till today, 7 years later, there's not that much out there for CPGs specifically. So I think there's a lot more that we can do with My Digital Shelf, and also collaboratively as an industry, to have more information, more data, and more partnership opportunities.
Absolutely. Agree with you 100%. And quite honestly, I was really excited about the summit when I learned about it, because there truly is that gap of gathering places for CPG brands and retailers to get together and really collaborate. So I know I'm super appreciative of the event. Prior to the event being here in Canada, we really had to rely on a lot of information coming out of the US. And while we do share a lot of similarities, there are definitely a lot of differences as well between the two different markets. So I'm actually just going to take a sec to remind everybody that we do have the comments field open. So feel free to add any questions that you might have throughout our conversation. We'll get to them before we wrap up today. And I know Sarah is eager to answer some questions.
Definitely.
All right. So let's get into it then. What needs or challenges did you see specifically in the CPG industry that really pushed you to developing, My Digital Shelf? I know you mentioned there was a gap there, but what can you think about some of the specific things that you were hearing from brands?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Of course, I've mentioned from a conference perspective, or webinar sort of platform perspective, that there is not much information, but the actual information that people are looking for is what we want to provide, right? So I think especially within grocery and CPG, it was very new, and it still is very new for a lot of brands. Sectors within fashion, electronics, those sectors within retail people have been much more comfortable shopping with them for many more years. So really it's about understanding the online shopper. There are so many differences with the in-store experience compared to buying clothes. What's the equivalent of the gondola end? Can you pick your fruit and veg online? Do you want to do that? What should you buy online? Is it bulk items, or are people also leaning more towards impulse buying as well? So a lot of things to do with how do you translate the in-store experience to online. I think that was the main thing, and that's why it's called the digital shelf, right? Because it's all about understanding the difference between the in-store shelf and the digital shelf. So that was really the main thing, and secondary was about partnerships. How can we all start working together as an industry? The retailer partnerships, but also a key factor was partnerships with agencies, with solution providers such as yourselves, GeekSpeak. Having your support as one of our sponsors at our events is really beneficial to the brands, so that they can see tracks all sorts of things, get the feedback, and a lot of brands are still at that phase where they're looking at the basics, so even the basics are so important, and for somebody that has been in the industry for a while, you're still discovering what the basics are, so it's always there's always something new that we need to learn about when it comes to CPG e-commerce.
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, it seems like e-commerce is commonplace today, but it's still very new and it is constantly changing. And I love the point that you made about partnership, because at GeekSpeak, as an agency, we sort of sit in a unique space in that we're interacting with brands, we're interacting with distributors, as well as retailers. And so we understand the challenges on each of those ends. And sometimes it's interesting. It's sort of like, if we could all just get together and figure out the best way to communicate and actually present products online, it would be that much easier. So I think, events like the summit definitely are starting to bring the different groups together for those types of conversations.
Yeah.
So speaking of the online and digital grocery summit, it's your biggest event, which is in its 7th year in the US and in the UK and the US, and it's in the 5th year now in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And you also held it twice in the Netherlands. Can you talk about your decision to expand into Canada specifically, in terms of the gaps that you thought were unique in the Canadian landscape?
Great question. Yeah, I think it was a natural next step for us from the US with Walmart. So I think the main thing was, about 5 years ago, that was the time where Walmart had been investing for a long time in what we have as Asda over here in the UK, and then of course in the US, and they had really started to prioritize their e-commerce in Canada, which meant naturally that all of the brands, the large brands in Canada were starting to pay more attention to e-commerce, and we saw that was going to have a domino effect, which it has now, because even Loblaws have their separate digital center as well. So we saw that it's definitely going to catch up with their counterpart in the US very soon, and that was really the main driving force to provide that platform for the retailers and the brands to come together. So we've always had Walmart support with our event. They've presented every year, and that was the main thing in the first year that we did this event, was really to hear from Walmart what was their plan going to be, how could brands start to partner with them and really start to prioritize the digital shelf.
Absolutely. And I can confirm Walmart Canada is very, very active on the e-commerce side. There's a lot going on there, a lot of change, a lot of evolution. And, other players in the market, like you mentioned Loblaw as well, very busy, very active. Voila by Sobeys is another one. So it's great to see a lot of the, the development and changes happening in Canada. It's been a long time coming.
Definitely. And especially with the pandemic now, it's accelerated more than ever, hasn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So given that you've worked with some of the biggest brands and retailers in North America as well as Europe, what would you say are some of the similarities and perhaps differences that you've seen across the markets in e-commerce within the CPG category?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, because I think, with my experience having done these events in multiple different markets where, they are at all different stages, the challenges do seem to resonate across each of those markets as the main challenges. So, for example, one of them would be data. So even though you could say, maybe the UK now is further ahead than some of the smaller markets in like the Netherlands or Australia, for example, data is still one of the main things that the brands are not able to really fully, get their hands on, should I say. So that the retailers have that data. They have to be careful with that data, because, we're all still at this test and learn phase. So it's really sort of understanding your consumer and having really that budget to do those test and learns and see what works well, see what doesn't work well. So I would say, one of the main kind of global challenges within this industry is understanding data, getting your hands on that data, knowing what to do with that. How do you measure the return on your investments, for example, when you do campaigns with your online retailers? That would be one of the main things. And then I would say another thing is really coming back down to those partnerships. So, who should I go to if I need help with the digital shelf? To a large extent, you need to go to your retailer and you need to build that relationship with them and work very closely with them on a category level, but also on a brand specific level. And that comes back to what is the difference between in-store category management and online category management. But also, as I mentioned, those very crucial partnerships with agencies, with solution providers, even cross-category with other brands. What information can you get? How can you utilize it, really?
Mm-hmm, for sure. And, you make the point off the top about data, getting access to it in order to be able to make decisions, right? That's been the challenge from the very beginning. I think, brands really want to have a good understanding of what their return on investment might look like. So that continues to be a challenge. It'll be interesting to see how things play out in the years to come, around access to data for sure.
Definitely.
So you mentioned earlier, Sarah, that you're planning on expanding into new markets. Can you give us the heads up in terms of which countries you're looking at?
Yeah, that's very exciting for us. You mentioned the markets that we are quite established in now. So for next year, we're looking to expand into Germany, into France. Those will be sort of the larger, more established markets that we'll be launching our events in. And then we're also looking at some of the smaller markets, like Australia, for example, where Amazon is still very new there. It was only last year that really, Amazon had entered the market and really started to ramp things up. So yeah, those are some of the markets that we're looking at, but really and truly anywhere where online grocery is on the rise is a market that we are looking into to bring our events.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because, each of these markets or countries are really at different stages of their e-com journey. So it's interesting to sort of parachute in and examine where they are and see what gaps there are that you can help to fill for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So, your events bring these different groups together, the brands, the retailers, and so on. And so there's a lot of information sharing that I'm sure that you've come across and sort of been a fly on the wall for a lot of these conversations. Yeah. Wondering what your take is on what you think the biggest trends are that are emerging right now.
Yeah, great question again. I think it does definitely go back to, if we look specifically, I think more so in Europe, it will be looking at Amazon. So since Amazon in the US, we've noticed from 7 years ago, day one, when we were doing this event, Amazon was always one of the key retailers that people were looking at. But it's only in the last 1 to 2 years, really, that the brands in Europe are starting to prioritize and focus on the Amazon strategies. And, that's from a consumer perspective that we as Europeans now are starting to purchase more on Amazon than we would in some of our other traditional grocery stores. So yeah, that's definitely a trend that we're seeing in Europe. And I guess, having mentioned that Amazon has launched into Australia, that's sort of, how they're sort of seeing their expansion market by market, penetrating into Asia as well now. So definitely a big trend is the retailer specific. As I mentioned, partnerships, again, from a global perspective, we're seeing those partnerships. I think D2C or even alternative business models in general. So D2C being one of the big ones, a lot of brands are now considering, is it right for my brands? Or, is it taking away from my retailer business? Because that's something you don't want to do, right? Your retailer relationships are the most important thing as well. So how do you find that balance? Then even other alternative business models, looking at B2B is a big sector now as more companies are looking into wholesale purchasing. Even looking at food aggregators, the likes of the Uber Eats, the Deliveroos of the world. There are so many now, so many delivery companies that it's all about getting to the consumer as quickly as possible. So, that last mile delivery, people want to have their shopping within 20 minutes now, not two working days. So yeah, I think a lot more going towards alternative business models.
For sure. And, I can definitely confirm that a lot of those trends are emerging in Canada as well, especially that investment in Amazon. It is absolutely growing, whether you like it or not, depending on which side of the fence you're on. It's undeniable at this point. And it's interesting to see how things have changed sort of behaviorally as well, right? Who could have imagined that someone would be shopping online for items that you'd pick up at a corner store? Or a convenience store, right? So we're actually using Uber Eats for those types of transactions, picking up candy or juice or bread, whatever it is, those convenience items. So last mile has really been an important player, especially over the last 18 months. And it's just been really interesting to see how people have latched onto those services. So, we've seen massive growth in e-commerce throughout the pandemic here in Canada. We saw an increase of 75% in the sales channel, right, in 2020. and sales are expected to reach 86.52 billion in 2021. So some pretty big numbers for Canada. And a lot of these surges can be attributed to store closures or reduced hours, or quite honestly, just consumers opting to stay out of the fray. They prefer to stay home, not deal with the crowds, the masks and all of that. So they just prefer to order online. What are your thoughts? Do you think e-commerce will continue to grow in a post-COVID world?
Oh, that's such an interesting question because, like as you said, during lockdowns, during pandemics, you didn't have a choice, right? You had to shop online. I think though that that's going to have a huge impact on how consumers continue to shop now. Grocery was always behind in terms of people being comfortable to do their shopping online versus, buying an electronic item. I'll just easily buy the new iPhone that's come out because I can watch a video of it. Whereas your food and drinks, you don't tend to return them, right? Like you would a pair of jeans or an electronic item. So, but I think now that people have seen how easy it is, how comfortable they are doing it, that you do get good quality items, and it does tend to be more so, the bulk buying. So you'll buy, bulk of drinks, of cupboard foods, and you can still go to the corner shop to get some of your smaller, fresher pieces that you would naturally get every 2 to 3 days anyway. So now that people have seen how easy it is to do, how much time you save doing that, and that you do get those quality items, that I think that will continue to stay that way. So I think a lot of things, similar to people wanting now to have that balance of working from home because they've experienced now what it's like to work from home and you want that balance, the same will definitely resonate, in my opinion, for online grocery. In fact, I think it will continue to drive it up further because even generations that wouldn't have done any type of shopping, older generations, even they have seen now that it's easier for them to do their grocery shopping online.
Absolutely. It's so easy. They don't have to worry about transportation, help with the groceries and all that good stuff. And they say it takes 21 days to develop a habit. Well, we've had 18 months of this where folks have gotten used to online shopping and the convenience, the process, and all of that. And there are so many options, like you called out in your response there. You could buy online, schedule delivery on a specific day and time slot. You could do buy online, pick up in store, or you could, order from Instacart or Uber Eats and get your delivery within the hour or within a 2-hour time slot. So there's just so many different options these days. I think it'll be very difficult to move away from that at this point.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the consumer now. How have changing customer expectations affected e-com strategies for CPG brands?
Oh, great question. I think having seen now with these food aggregators, I think that's one of the main things. It's only very recently that you can start getting your groceries within a couple of days, within a few days. It was, up until a year or two ago, it would have been, you book it for the next week, so you can't really plan. You have to plan. You can't be as impulsive. You can't decide last minute what you want to have for dinner. So I think that's one of the things now, which across every sector within digital, we would like to have things as quick as possible, right? So I think that's been something that the grocery sector has really swiftly now adapted to. In the UK, for example, on our food delivery apps, we have the supermarkets on them. So they've got partnerships where, typically you'd go to order a takeaway, but you can now also just order some of your groceries on those as well. So I think that's one of the main things that we've seen the grocery industry adapting to. They saw that they needed to do that, and that will also be a massive boost because there are, of course, the larger households that want to do the planning and they're happy to know it's coming next week at a specific time. But then there are also the shoppers that want it more on demand.
Absolutely. And I think, sometimes it's the same shopper, but just depending on the day, right? So today I might think about making a lasagna and I need to pick up a few ingredients that I don't have in my fridge or the cupboard. And I need that, quick last mile delivery. But then again, I might plan ahead and actually schedule, my big grocery shopping like 2 days out or a day out. So it really depends on what's going on with the consumer in any given day. So
exactly.
A lot has changed in a very short time, for sure.
Definitely.
So let's talk about some of the challenges that CPG brands have faced during the pandemic. I know that, the strain on the supply chain has been a big one. That's probably the most obvious challenge. But can you think of any others that have sort of emerged?
Challenges during the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there's been quite a few. I think as you mentioned, like delivery infrastructures. I actually think a lot of brands were very well equipped in terms of having the stock. Having the inventory. I think that is more for the larger brands though. So I think some maybe smaller brands have had, both sides of the coin, in that people are taking a bit more time to research, and they want to have, new up and coming brands that have some, other factors within them that, whether it be gluten free or organic. So a lot of up and coming brands now have had that opportunity thanks to the pandemic. But on the flip side, they haven't been able to keep up with the demand as well as the larger brands have. So yeah, I definitely agree with you that it's to do with delivery, it's to do with infrastructure. I think one of the main things is that will be a struggle, that has been and will continue to be a struggle, is how do we maintain that customer base? So people have been trying new things, trying out, you see a lot of offers, buy one get one free, this and that. So now it's all about the shoppers that you have acquired during the pandemic. How do you retain them? And that's really why you need to understand the digital shelf, because it's about having that loyalty. That's a main factor, having that loyalty, having that personalization, and having those repeat customers. That is really going to help the brands to stand out against other brands in their categories.
Absolutely. And, I think the pandemic was a bit of a wake-up call for a lot of brands that really forced them to examine things internally from a supply chain perspective, but also their readiness to sell on the e-commerce channel, right? So are we ready to actually present our products on the digital shelf? Have we done the work to optimize our listings? Do we understand how search actually works? Do we know how those online promotions, like you mentioned, works, and how can we participate, right? So it was definitely a big wake-up call, and it's certainly gotten the attention of a lot of brands, I think, going forward.
Yes, yeah, that's a great point. I mean, from an internal from an internal perspective, when you see those sales drive up, you don't want to see them drop again, right? So you've got that pressure on you now to be like, yeah, that was great, our sales shot up, but I want to see that steadiness now. I want to see that steady growth. I don't want to see it decline now. So how are we going to maintain that? How are we going to retain those shoppers, and how are we going to maintain this additional revenue that we've been seeing, right?
Exactly. And that's a good segue into my next question, actually. So, when you've been talking to these different brands and retailers over the past several months, what do you think they're looking forward to most rolling into 2022 from a strategy perspective? Like, we've endured the pandemic, we're still dealing with it, but, what are they looking forward to come 2022?
I think that definitely budget is a major thing. I think that every brand that's been successful during the pandemic will now be able to justify internally the importance of e-commerce, and that comes down to budget. So whether that be upscaling all of your different departments internally, having more meetings, having more get-togethers when it comes to e-commerce, hiring internally, building out your e-commerce team, not just one or two e-commerce managers now, but growing that team internally, getting that training that you need. And then, of course, from an external perspective, growing those partnerships, having more budget to give to your retailer. It is a struggle for the smaller brands, but the more you can invest with your retailers, the better your products are going to stand out on the digital shelf, right? So having that budget to work with your retailers, do more test and learn, do more trial and errors, have that extra flexibility within your budget to see what works well. And then those partnerships with the agencies, with the solution providers such as yourselves as well, is equally important to really, again, test and learn, see what works well, what doesn't work well. And, you need to invest in order to get that return, right? So if you can do an audit and see, what's not working so well with your brand, what can you do even better? You invest that, and then the returns are even greater, right? So I think that's one of the things that this industry will be most excited about, is getting more enthusiasm from your different departments internally, getting more budget from a financial perspective, and just that general more kind of excitement that we are now in one of the fastest growing, rapidly emerging sectors within grocery and within retail as a whole.
Absolutely. And, I love your point about budgets, because as I said off the top of the show, that's traditionally been a challenge in the e-commerce space, is getting brands, retailers even, to want to invest in the channel, because they always wanted to see those numbers return on their investment. I think now we're at a stage where the results are undeniable. And so a lot of brands actually have budgets being thrown at them to grow the e-com channel. So it's been interesting to see that change. And then you touched on teams. A lot of brands and retailers are still sort of figuring out what the dynamic should look like from an e-com perspective. Should those responsibilities rest with the brand managers, the sales team? Who should own that channel, right? So it's been interesting to see how things are changing, and how are teams actually trying to identify the skills that they need to really fill out the teams that support e-com. So great answer, and I agree with you. I've seen it in my interactions too with a lot of brands and retailers as well.
Yeah.
So again, I'm going to take a moment here just to remind folks that you can drop your questions for Sarah in the comments field, and we'll be sure to pick those up before we wrap things up for today. So let's shift back a little bit, Sarah, and talk about this year's online and digital grocery summit. So the UK event took place in May and the Netherlands took place in June. Mm-hmm. Can you share some highlights from either of those events?
Yeah, absolutely. They were our second year doing the events virtually. There was really kind of high demand for us to keep doing our events virtually, as opposed to kind of waiting until we can be back in person. So some really great insights were shared. We had some great retailers. We had a session by Asda and Muller, which is a large retailer and a large brand here in the UK, which was really very exciting for the audience, because it's all about those partnerships. So having a brand and a retailer talk about how they work together was definitely one of the sessions that had the really, really good feedback from our audience. So again, it really came down to partnerships, Amazon being a focus and a priority now more so than ever in the UK. We've had a couple of our first Amazon Fresh physical stores opening up here, so that was a great experience to be able to go in and see what that would be like as well. And everything now, one of the main takeaways that I think will resonate in our upcoming events in the US and Canada as well, is looking at things from an omni-channel perspective. There is going to be that mix of what am I buying in store versus what am I buying online, and how can the brands really look at things now from an omni-channel perspective.
For sure. And that's certainly been a topic of conversation for a few years now. So I see that continuing on for sure. So let's talk about the US and Canadian summits that are coming up very, very quickly. The US event is on October 21st, and the Canadian summit is on October 28th. What can attendees expect? Can you give us a bit of a preview on the programming?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, we can share the URLs for both events for people that are interested in learning more about them. The US event has got a great lineup of brands, and yeah, that's coming up on the screen now. That's www.digitalgrocerysummit.com. We'll be hearing some insights, which actually will be in the Canadian event as well. We'll be hearing from Coca-Cola about food aggregators, so all the alternative sort of food aggregators that I was mentioning, like Deliveroo, Uber Eats. How can CPGs partner with them? We'll be hearing from Barilla and Unilever with some global perspectives around their experiences during the pandemic, and the new the new normal as we're calling it now. We'll be hearing about alternative business models that I mentioned, like B2B, D2Z. So yeah, a lot of similarities that we've seen with our European events are resonating in the North American market as well. Of course, again, this year we have Walmart presenting at our Canadian event, and they've been really ramping up. They've invested a lot more in their delivery infrastructure and stock availability as well, to make sure that they can keep up with the new demand in Canada as well. So yeah, very excited to hear what the latest updates from Walmart Canada are as well.
I am too. I'm really looking forward to the event. I will be there, and the team from GeekSpeak will be there to participate, and really looking forward to seeing you and everybody else there once again. So it looks like we've got a question from our viewers here. I'm just gonna read that. So what role does content play in winning the digital shelf? How are CPG brands fitting content into their strategies?
Oh, we've been chatting for some time now, and I haven't actually mentioned much about content yet, which is really interesting because content is king. That's definitely the motto, and that is the main thing. And really, I guess the reason I haven't mentioned it is because it's part of everything. If you talk about the digital shelf, if you talk about omni-channel, if you talk about partnerships, there is always that element of content that falls under it. So, I think that content has one of the biggest roles to play when it comes to winning on the digital shelf. If your product imagery doesn't look proper, this comes back down to the basics, right? If people can't see your product well, if they can't read the key information that they want to read about it, if it's a multi-pack but I can't clearly see how many items are actually in this pack, is this a good deal? If you've got an offer going on, how do I know if it's a good deal or not? Then people won't purchase it. They'll be very quick to see what else is on the second line of the first page, as opposed to your product. So I think fixing the basics and then going beyond the basics. There's the basics of content, but then there's content 2.0, there's content 3.0. Once you've fixed the basics, there's always more shoppers that you can convert to your brand. So, now we're starting to look at, do videos make sense, for example? If I'm buying a simple product, then, maybe I don't need to watch a video about it. But, so many sort of meal solutions, for example, which products go well together. And again, that comes down to those partnerships. I think it's essentially a very pivotal role within your digital shelf and your e-commerce strategies.
I so appreciate this question, and I so appreciate your answer, because this is the area that we play in every day at GeekSpeak, right? Is really helping brands to create content that drives sales online. That's the area that we play in. And I agree with you 100%. Start with those basics and gradually work your way up to enhanced content. And I think sometimes it can be daunting for brands who are earlier on in their journey. They look at their entire assortment and think, where am I going to start? But you said it, start with those basics and work your way up. You just really have to start and chip away at it. And, whether you decide to hire folks internally to build out that content or work with partners like GeekSpeak, it just needs to be started at some point, right?
Absolutely.
So I've got one more question here, Sarah. Do you have any success stories or case studies you can share about brands and retailers meeting and connecting at your events?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, given that our event is more of a CPG orientated event, that's what, kind of sets it apart from a brand perspective, that they want to come because it's created for them. So the retailers that we do get our event, that joining our event, and we have their support as speakers or as attendees, they know that they're coming to the event because the brands want to meet with them, the brands want to hear from them, and that's what kind of sets it apart, right? So they're coming in with that mindset of, we want to share insights for the brands to learn about us. We want to bring some more teammates to the event, even if it's a virtual event, so that they've got some other people to ask questions to connect with, to follow up with at a later stage, and see how they can continue those conversations and really help them. And there are teams that work with the larger brands and teams that work with the smaller, new and upcoming brands as well. So we definitely have had a lot of success with having those connections, and especially with the smaller brands that don't have as many of those meetings with the large retailers that the bigger brands do. So that's one of the main reasons of putting this event on, so that the brands can take more ownership, the brands can hear more from their retailers. But I know that it's been a couple of years that we're working together now as well, and it's not only the retailer relationships, right? It's also those relationships with the agencies, with the solution providers. So I think you've had some great connections, I hope, at our last event, that
Yes.
hopefully we'll have again this year.
Yes, I could definitely vouch for that. It is a great meeting place for different partners in this e-commerce ecosystem, for sure. In fact, I learned about the summit from a client who told me about this event, where they were talking about the importance of content on the digital shelf. And so, the client told me about it, and they apparently shared our contact information with other attendees. And, it's just sort of grown from there. Last year was the first time that we sponsored the event, and it was fantastic because, it's one of the smaller conferences or summits in terms of numbers, but you have the right people in the right place, right? So the big brands, and it's also the folks who are decision makers as well, and who are really going to drive strategy going forward. So I could definitely vouch for it being a great meeting place.
Glad to hear so.
For sure. So I think we're close to the end here, Sarah, and we like to wrap things up with a bit of a fun question. Could you share what the last item you purchased online was, and how was that customer experience?
Oh, that's such funny timing for you to ask me this question. We have a sort of health retailer called Holland & Barrett's. I'm not sure what they'd be the equivalent of in the US. Kind of like a mix of, it's sort of Walgreens. I guess the equivalent of Walgreens is what they would be here in the UK, but it's a lot more sort of organic, natural products. I took that opportunity to shop online because we have this thing called the penny sale. So it's when you buy one item and you get the same item for a penny. So essentially it's buy one, get one free, but I really like the way that they go about that because they call it the penny sale instead. Okay. So they still make that extra penny on the second item that you purchase. But it's a big trend here that, everybody waits for the penny sale at Holland & Barrett's. So I did quite a big shop online, but then the products were caught in transit. So I think it shows that, with there's still so much that the retailers out there have yet to sort of fine tune when it comes to this. So I actually ordered this last week, and it was meant to be coming within 2 days, and it's been almost a week now that I'm waiting for it. So I had to call them, ask them what happened, and they said it got something happened in transit, so they were actually just going to send out a completely new order.
Wow, amazing. Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's a great case study for how you really need focus and attention on every stage of the game, right? You've got this great brand, this great promotion, but the logistics piece has to be there as well to have a really positive customer experience. But thank you so much for sharing that story, and so much for your time as well. This has been an amazing conversation, Sarah. It's been great getting to know you a little bit better and really looking forward to the upcoming summit in October. Before we go, Sarah, do you want to share with our viewers where they can find you, get in contact with you?
Yeah, absolutely. Would love to. So yeah, my full name is Sarah Kingham. To connect with me on LinkedIn, I am quite active on LinkedIn. We like to post a lot about our events, our webinars, and all of our great key speakers that we have at each event. And for those of you in Canada that are interested in seeing more information about our Canadian event, the website for that is www.digitalgrocerysummit.ca. So you can see our speaker lineup, you can see our agenda, and you can also register on the website as well. That event is on October the 28th.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in for this episode of Point of Purchase. If you're interested in learning more about GeekSpeak, please be sure to check us out on geekspeakcommerce.com. We'd love to talk to you. And you can also follow us on social media. Keep an eye out for our next live episode, which should be coming up soon. Have a great rest of your day, everyone, and we'll see you next time on Point of Purchase. Thanks, Sarah. Take care.
Thank you for having me. Thanks a lot. Take care.